When I look at AI, and the specific question often comes up is, should we or shouldn't we? Is it good or bad? They're the three things that I like to use as like a keyhole into the way we should be approaching this question. First is, what's your intention? What are you trying to achieve? Oh, I'm all about profit. Oh, well, that's very clear. What is your intentionality? Because you're always going to screw it up, but intentions matter as you try to organize a team, a company, and clients. The second is, what is your ethical framework? And have you got one? And what does it look like? And how does it reflect your intentionality? And the third thing, which is always important, which is your business model.
Welcome to Season 13 of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. I want to thank you for watching, enjoy the show, and if you haven't already picked up a copy, I invite you to do so. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today, I am joined by Minter Dial, who is a speaker and award-winning author specialized in leadership, branding, and transformation. He's an agent of change who has exercised 12 different professional métiers. It's crazy. And changed countries 15 times. Amazing. He's also the author of a World War II book and the film The Last Ring Home, as well as 3 business books, including You Lead and what I see over your shoulder and what I'm holding in my hand, Heartificial Empathy, putting your heart into business and artificial intelligence. And I was skimming through the book again and finding quotes that I wanted to start our conversation with. Thank you for joining the show. You're the only guest that I've had a second time. And that's because this book is out in second reprint. Given everything that's happened around AI and artificial ChatGPT, we got to talk about empathy and technology.
I'm honored.
Oh, well, it's great to see you. And I know we're doing an event in London in a few weeks, which is very exciting. Look forward to meeting you in person. You wrote, our brains, business models, and societal norms all need to be rewired and rethought. It's a big statement. Our society needs a major empathy upgrade. So what role does empathy have in this social transformation that you envision?
Well, I think it's a very broad statement because it basically applies to a broad number of people. And in this, I'm thinking both sides of all aisles in our division, our inability to listen to one another, our deep focus on ourselves in a rather swashbuckling, narcissistic manner. There's so many examples on all sides, in many cases, countries. We need to develop a greater sense of empathy. And I would put an emphasis on the word greater, because I'm not asking for the greatest, for the most and only. It's just that we need to upgrade from where we are and be better at it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the converted. So in the business world, how do you promote empathy? Where do you start? What do you do? How you do it? Tell me.
Well, so I tend to start with trying to understand what the business problem is. Because if you're not trying to cope with or be in the context of the strategic imperatives of the company, it's very unlikely that whatever efforts you're doing, the budgets won't be allocated, the efforts won't be there. So I try to understand, what are the challenges that a company is facing? Hey, listen, dude or madam, what is your issue? And or my issue is that we don't have enough innovation. Or my issue is we have struggling to recruit new talent, or we're struggling to renovate the park of customers that we have, or whatever it is. Okay, so we'll start from there, and then look at how we can improve the process and where empathy can play a part of that. That's sort of how I articulate the beginning part. Of course, you could do empathy everywhere for everything, but this is how I tend to approach it. So it's a rather pragmatic thing. The second thing I'll do is I'll make sure to understand or allow them to have a better self-awareness of where they actually sit with regard to the empathy. Because if they don't have a more honest understanding, it's going to be very hard to make any improvements. Oh, I already know about that stuff, or oh, I don't need it. And that's the two things. And then the last piece is that I will tend to, in my definition of empathy, which I know is not everybody's, is that I will divide them very specifically and in the definition of empathy into two pieces. And I tend to allow this, so the definition being split between cognitive and affective or emotional empathy, the feeling side. And if we can allow that there is such a thing specifically cognitive, it's a much easier thing for typically rational, over intellectual, managers and whatever to compute this notion of cognitive empathy and therefore to onboard it, to get into learning it, because it's very hard to teach someone how to feel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's a whole lot easier to teach them to, providing they want to, listen. It's a whole lot easier for them to want to understand that people are different and how can they be different and why is it interesting to learn that the people are different. So all these cognitive aspects I bring into the equation, that's the way I approach it.
So, okay, can we make this very granular? With clients that you work with, you mentioned a few things that, I mean, I know from my own work that, empathy has a big role to play across a bunch of different problems, la problématique. I think a lot of people are still in this impression that you bring in like an empathy training program if you're having like a crisis in communications, or if there's been like a merger and people are feeling afraid of their job and there's lots of anxiety, or I don't know, some kind of bad situation. But you're looking at the leveraging the power of empathy in a very, offensive, productive way in order to achieve more innovation or to attract the best talent. So can you give examples, without naming companies necessarily, about like how you've approached helping a company by infusing more empathy in their workplace?
Well, I had a very specific example about 5 months ago, working with a company who was working on their marketing, and their marketing wasn't effective enough. They were trying to improve it. Should we use AI and all these other things? I said, well, let's talk about how well you understand your customer. Well, we know them very well. Let's talk about that. And they were so academic in their breaking down of customers. They really weren't thinking about the experience, the emotions, the feelings of customers. And so well, how do people react? What are you trying to achieve with your emails, for example? Oh, well, we're trying to achieve 6% opening. Okay, that's one way of answering it. What are you hoping that they feel when there's a bing, you've got mail? Well, we got into that kind of a work, and basically, what's your objective of the feeling you want them to have? And tried to elaborate and brought together a feeling. And they're like, now, what type of words and images do you think will be appropriate for that? Anyway, this is basically decoding, deconstructing empathy in the context of an email marketing campaign. And it allowed them through this process to start thinking about being in the shoes of, on the receiving end of, and reorganizing what they're trying to achieve. Because if you're only trying to move from 5.5 to 6.0% open rate, this is just such the wrong way to wag the cat.
And the younger generation, they're cynical about advertising. They know that it's a constant in their life and they want to feel engaged, right? So what is a way of engaging different markets by sort of turning up the volume of empathy?
Well, two easy ways. The first is get them involved in the process. So invite them to participate, but not in a way that a lot of people tend to do, which is sort of, tell me what you think and yeah. Put it in a black box and don't deal with it. So I really want your opinion, but I don't really give a toss. That's not going to work. So invite them up front in a way that is tangible, realistic, for them to actually have some kind of imprint on what you're trying to do. And surely getting engagement, well, if you can think through what's in their interests, think through what they're feeling, and then they're going to be much more interested in it. Yeah, and the second way, Anita, is storytelling.
Mm.
It's funny. The issue is that it can't be just sort of corporate story. Make it personal. When you're running a company and you want your team to believe in you, to follow you, don't run out some sort of dry story or something that you don't actually feel. Try to make it personal and somehow, without it being inauthentic, show that you were not perfect in the story.
Mm.
So bring out some kind of vulnerability without necessarily having to drop your trousers. You need to show that some emotional engagement, something deeper resonating in the story. And I mean, by the way, that helps with everybody, but I think it's going to be particularly relevant when you're talking to a younger generation.
Yeah, they don't want anything pristine. They want authenticity. They want fallibility. They want sort of like, real humanity. And we all crave that by nature, right? And they're just saying like, okay, come on, give it to me.
Well, they are, and we all are. Where I feel like we also need to bring some semblance of reality. So whenever you're doing this, we need to not overpromise. There's always got to be I feel a little bit more reality, and so we're not in a kumbaya approach. We're not in a overselling approach, because at the end of the day, it's like purpose, for example. This is about purposeful empathy. Well, just talking about purpose without bringing in the word profit, not a good idea. If you have no profit, you serve no purpose. So this is the element of pragmatism, of reality that I want to bring back in. I always want to bring back in. That's reality. Two, it's actually the language of the senior management. And if you just sort of go in with just purpose or just empathy, fine. You and I get it, but in the end of the day, it has to fit in, and it has to fit into the strategy. It has to fit into their general mindset. Otherwise, it's going to bounce off like water off a duck's back.
Indeed. Know your audience. Okay, so one of the key reasons I wanted you back on the show is to really dig deep on the machine stuff, right? So I really want to have a conversation. I know you're an expert. You've been thinking about this. You wrote an entire book about it, but I have my own thoughts too. So let's like really go at this.
Let's do it.
Do you believe that empathy can be programmed into machines? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? How can it be useful on a day-to-day basis? What should we be worried about at a macro societal level? Let's play with this.
All right. Well, I'm going to start with yes, I believe it can. What about you?
I think that yes, it can, because human beings can be tricked by a lot of things that will make them feel good that might not be sentient. It can approach it. Yeah.
All right. So that brings up another point, which is, I talked about cognitive and affective before. And to the extent that before I was talking about bringing in empathy into a business culture, breaking it down into cognitive, to the extent that we separate or limit it to cognitive, there's a much greater chance of doing that within a machine. But the second point is critical, and I'd also like to split this up, which is the emitter and the receiver. So let's say you and I are having conversation, as we are, and I want to try to be empathic with Anita. So that means that I'm going to be the emitter of empathy, and Anita's the receiver, and in this case, the judge of my ability to be empathic. However, there are times when I can be empathic and you have no idea about any empathy in it. It's sort of implicit in the delivery. For example, I might be creating a shampoo, and in the shampoo, I'm going to think of it, and Anita in her shower, well, maybe she's put some shampoo in her hair and in her hands, and her hands are slippery. So maybe I should make the bottle have some grip on the side so it doesn't slip out of her hand. So in this act, I'm the emitter. I am being empathic. But you showering, are you thinking I'm being empathic? You're far removed from the emission that I was thinking of. Yet, I think I could qualify myself as being empathic.
Right. Okay. So let me just stop you here for a second. I know you're going somewhere, but let me just make sure I understand what we're saying right now. So all good design has empathy at the center of the user experience. So having this bottle that has these little grooves on the side so it doesn't fall out of my hand was excellent design thinking, placing my needs front and center, where I might be conscious of it at one point, like, oh, cool that they have these little grids. It doesn't slip out of my hand. That's good design. Or I'm unconscious of it, right? But there it is. There's the empathy in the design of that product. I'm following.
Right. The difference or the specific element I'm looking at is Anita in the shower might observe the grip, but isn't going to equate that with empathy.
Right.
So you're the you're benefiting from it, but you might even observe it, but you don't sort of name it. And this is an incredibly important part, because if we're talking about, can a machine be empathic? Well, it depends if you want to only be on the recipient judgment. Because sometimes empathy doesn't mean being nice. Sometimes empathy means just listening and maybe doing nothing is the empathic thing. And then maybe truly empathic, yet as a recipient where in society and much of our work, we tend to believe they are the recipient is the only way to measure empathy. I tend to look at the idea of injecting empathy, and as an emitter, evaluating my intention and ability to be empathic. And so when you get down to this, at this point, what I'm trying to get to is that in this, if you can separate those out, I absolutely believe that you can inject and have a better emitting of empathy in machines. Afterwards, the question then lies, can you separate that from the recipient?
Okay, so that's interesting. Do you believe machines can be empathic? Your answer is yes, because you can design machines to have more of a quote unquote empathetic or empathic interface with the person who's using them, right?
Yeah.
So it's not from the point of view of like, can machines actually be imbued with the human sentient quality of consciousness and empathy that humans recognize between each other? Okay, so I'm following you. All right, so then in that case, probably most machines that are being devised, most AI is being designed, if people are designing them with empathy for the user in mind, that's a good thing, right? So where does it fall off where is it problematic? Do you see any?
Well, there are many. All right, but I want to add one more piece, because this is obviously a big topic, which is measuring empathy. And here's the other key part: to think that it's a yes no is wrong. You can be kind of empathic. You can be very empathic. You can fall off the wheelhouse, in empathy at this moment in the conversation. You get back into the groove 15 minutes later, because the topic changed, the ambiance, something, the joint felt better or whatever. And so this nuance of measuring is absolutely critical. Where does it go wrong? Well, so many places it goes wrong. Let's start with the actual programmer. The people programming artificial intelligence typically are very logical people who are very rigorous, like to do 1, then 2, then 3, and follow rules. This is not the mindset that is typically best programmed for empathy. So you need to deal with managers who are managing the programmers. You need to deal with CEOs or executives who are worried about profitability. And in there's there's not a lot of evident welcoming of empathy. So we already have a set of actors in the programming area that aren't necessarily qualified for empathy. How often do you see an anthropologist and a psychotherapist or someone who's got deep empathy involved in that type of work? So that's the very first part. And then the second part is you need data. In order to craft a strong empathic AI, you need to have information. And in order to get that information, you need to have a level of trust. But if you don't trust me, I'm not going to get your data. And then if I don't have your data, then what kind of understanding does this machine have of you, Anita? Nothing. So just will treat you based on very broad, bland, and unuseful information. So if you don't have trust in the data or don't have trust in the machine, you won't give it the data then won't be able to serve up a more empathic response.
Hi there. At the risk of interrupting this great conversation, I just want to draw your attention to two things. There's over 150 episodes on the Purposeful Empathy channel. You may want to check them out, and I would invite you to press the subscribe button so that you get them into your mailbox every week so you don't miss a show. Thanks so much for watching. Without any ad spend or SEO, we have over 25,000 organic views. I want to thank you so much for watching. Again, hit the subscribe button. The world needs more empathy, and you have a role to play. Okay, so I have gone back to a little story a few times with guests, and I'm going to take it in a new direction with you, because it is about AI and where machines can actually, I think, be useful in sort of day-to-day life. So I was at the airport leaving on my first leg of my book tour, and my flight was canceled, not delayed, canceled. Okay, so I get a text. I go to the customer care lineup. Thankfully, I reacted quickly. I was towards the beginning of the line. There were 2 customer care agents. By the time I got up, I was next to a woman. I had the bandwidth and the psychic capacity to say, okay, I didn't have to get on this flight because I don't have anything going on tonight. As long as I get to Boston within the next 12 hours, I'm going to be okay. So my conversation with my guy was pleasant, whereas the woman next to me needed to be on that flight, and she was stressed and was rude to the guy that she was interfacing with. And behind the scenes, as an additional layer to this, my guy was visibly training the new guy. Okay. So it was just a lot. And there were many
a lot of meta stuff.
Exactly. And there were 30 people in the lineup for each of us. Okay. So this was just the beginning of their fun episode. So I'm thinking on several levels of, okay, our brains can't be in a state of anxiety and empathy simultaneously. So she was stressed out. She couldn't be empathic. That's one thing. So then she's dealing with a human being who's she's now yelling at, being almost abrasive / abusive with him, making him feel small. And I'm sure, and I've been her at some point, we all have, right? Let's not pretend. So in these circumstances, imagine having some kind of robotic interface that could address your issue and down-regulate and say things in a way that actually might be able to bring down the level of stress. I think it is possible to program AI to do that and reroute her and maybe, give her a little bonus, something, so that she feels good, and might not fix the problem, but at least she won't feel worse off. So I feel that there is an opportunity for AI to play a role in customer care, for example. But then I think about, how robots are being used in elder care homes. I think Japan was a leader in that, right? And so you've got people who are living with Alzheimer's, who are repeating themselves, that don't have regular visits. Little robot that's having a conversation with you sounds amazing. Why wouldn't we take advantage of that? But then I just feel this whole move towards more interface with machines, what is going to happen to our human-to-human relationships? What is the aggregate change that's going to happen to us as humans as we develop these relationships? Because one of the issues, and I'll stop talking in a second, but is that I listened to somebody recently share that we need friction in our lives. Like it's part of the human experience for things to go wrong, where things are not flawless. So if we're interfacing with humans all the time, with machines all the time, even if it gets to the point where it's like almost romantic relationships with machines, like, how are we going to ever prefer human to human relationships, which are so fraught with disappointment and aggravation?
I'm thinking you were listening to Esther Perel.
Might have been. Yes, yes, yes. Yes,
Because
you're
I
right.
think in the end of the day, we do need friction and we need messiness and we need to, I mean, because life is about dealing with challenge. A challengeless life is not a it's impossible. It's an undesirable. And I've been having conversations, for example, around the idea recently about consent. So before you and I engage in a deeper relationship, I want to know where we are, and is it okay that I can put my hand on your arm? Yes or no? Okay, yes. Okay, great. Which part of the arm? On this part. Oh my gosh. Is that what we are amongst human beings rendering ourselves? This is without, I'm talking without technology. This is how society is moving along. And so I think there's a conversation needs to happen about how society is in general, forgetting technology. Because The Age of Narcissism was written in 1979, well before social media and the narcissism that is exhibited on a regular basis today. Issues of uh, protection and precautionariness, where we don't want to risk anything or get in any trouble or danger. Well, this is what society is doing. This has nothing to do with technology. And so, of course, and we were talking about the dangers before, if you have bad intentions, the way we're going to use AI is going to be bad. And people with bad intentions will use technology in inappropriate ways. And even unintentional shit's going to happen, because that is the way life is. I might have said something that unintentionally offended you. I didn't mean it, but then you have, as a human being, an ability to say, he didn't really mean it. He didn't offend me, so I'll deal with it. Meta, like you at the counter with the customer service. Or you're in a mode where you don't feel like you need to be empathic about this, because I have the right to. It's like, if we're always being empathic everywhere, we're going to get nowhere. Because in the end of the day, empathy is about understanding. So all I'm going to do is understand you, and you're not going to understand me. If I'm being empathic with you all the time, when's the reverse happen? Why is it that the only person who needs to be empathic is the superior? Shouldn't an employee also be able to exhibit empathy for the boss? Isn't that not a right, but a smart thing to do? Anyway, so I think that my rant here is that we as human beings have already all the work necessary to do. And the work with AI is interesting because it's going to allow us to explore what is empathy. How can we decode it? How can we encode it and understand it better? And I think that's an exciting part for me.
Interesting. Okay. I like this, that framing of it. I think what concerns me is that the paradigm that we are organized in society is late stage neoliberal capitalism. And so the profit motive drives a lot of things to a place where I think the society suffers to a large extent. So I'm just always like, I agree with you. You have to think about the programmers. You have to think about the intention of the AI. I think that all of that is really important. And we need, scholars, we need academics, we need activists, we need just random citizens to be engaged in this process. But I worry about where society is going to land 10 or 15 years from now, in light of all of the AI gold rush that we're in.
Well, these factors are definitely going to complicate things. I mean, society is in trouble, democracy is in trouble, capitalism is under siege. So there are a bunch of things, and forget other bigger war and climate change issues. There are lots of things we need to fix. I tend to, so I like to focus on the human side of the problems. When I look at AI, and the specific question often comes up is, should we or shouldn't we? Is it good or bad? They're the three things that I like to use as like a keyhole into the way we should be approaching this question. First is, what's your intention? What are you trying to achieve? Oh, I'm all about profit. Oh, well, that's very clear. What is your intentionality? Because you're always going to screw it up, but intentions matter as you try to organize a team, a company, and clients. The second is, what is your ethical framework? And have you got one? And what does it look like? And how does it reflect your intentionality? And the third thing, which is always important, which is your business model. Who are your stakeholders? What is your governance with regard to all this, the oversight? And if your business model means it's all about profit, well, it's very likely that it's going to break at some point. And in our world, I think that if you can organize good intentions, have a reasonable, not like a clamp home handcuff kind of ethical framework, and then consider your business model and think about how or to what extent it can be a long-term process, then we're in a better place. But when you look at it through that prism, it very quickly helps you to organize or think about whether it's going to be good or bad.
And that's why I think we need policies, we need oversight to ensure that the social contract between businesses and society is one where it's a mutual benefit. I think stakeholder capitalism makes a lot more sense than shareholder capitalism. And I think that that's really important in the conversation with AI, because when you have people who really understand AI putting together a letter saying we should have a moratorium on this development because we don't actually have a sense of like where it's going to go off the rails, that catches my attention. And I don't think these people intend to be alarmist just for the fun of it. I think they actually maybe do see down the line. So I really think it requires our citizen engagement. It requires our political engagement to ensure our protection without being sort of like technophobes. Because I think with every new wave of technology, there always have been people who have been fearful of it. And I would fall in that category because I'm not a fan of technology, even though I use technology. We're using it right now. But I think, I think it seems to feel like a bit of an existential moment with regards to AI.
Well, I agree with you, and I think that this is actually an existential moment at a bigger level. And AI is one sub piece of the crisis that we're undergoing, and it's maybe exacerbating underlying trends. I would also invite us in this conversation to think about how the shareholders will be brought along, because the issue with, like, let's talk about purpose. Purpose is great. We get purpose, but purpose without profit, no good. And purpose without money, so no money investing in you, going to be hard to make your business. And most businesses require injections of money, therefore shareholders. And if the shareholders aren't understanding their benefits in this, because there are some people, for example, who absolutely have no idea, no desire, no interest in purpose. They think that having money is purpose. They think that having a big house is my purpose, or at the very most generous, having a big family. All right, good for you. And maybe that is, but the broader understanding of purpose, so many people in the world don't even have it on their radar because they are just trying to live. And so this is another element of reality that I want to bring into this equation, which is we don't get Wall Street or the other financiers on board with this. It's going to be difficult to raise money and actually get the investments you need, the research that takes time to get a drug to market or something like this. And when everything will be programmed in a different way. So I mean, of course, I want it, but I also think we need to be realistic in how we engage with all the stakeholders, including the shareholders.
Mm. I want to explore another way that empathy is showing up in AI. And I have a very distinct memory from about, I want to say close to 10 years ago already. I work at McGill University. I was invited to a 2-day conference hosted by the university's administration, the senior management, inviting professors from all across the campus, all different disciplines. We were about 200 of us over 2 days brainstorming, how can we prepare for a university 50 years from now? What do we need to think about? How do we need to evolve and change to meet the needs of students 50 years from now? So to whet our appetite, they had a multidisciplinary team roll out, like this is the beginning of the day, sort of like get us in the headspace of like all this futuristic stuff that might be happening. So this team rolls out a table with a computer, and out comes a hologram. All right. It's a face of a pretend therapist. And one of the researchers from the team sits down on a chair face to face with the hologram and tells the therapist a sad story. Now, the therapist responds and says, so what I'm hearing you say is, and then reflects back. Now that's like something that happens in a therapist's office on the regular, right? Like therapists are trained to reflect back what they hear.
Hello, Mr. Rogers.
Helping, exactly. The room split into two. There was a gasp as this was happening, and half the room was like, oh, cool. The other half, oh my God, oh my God. Oh my. And I was in that camp, okay? All the humanists, all the humanities were like, what? How can they think that this like pixelated hologram is going to pretend to be a therapist? But so they were challenged, right? So obviously we had a conversation in the Q&A with this team, and they said, look, there aren't enough therapists to go around for the need that exists in the world. If we had bots that were good listeners, trained in AI to be able to reflect back. Like imagine if we could help a kid who was on the track of suicide or on the track of being, at the time was being attracted into ISIS or something. So what do you think about all of that?
Well, I want to start by going back to an experience that I had, which is I spent 5 days with an empathic bot. And at the beginning, I was quite dubitative as to the ability for a bot to be empathic with Minter. I mean, what did the bot know about me? Well, 3 days into it, I found myself quite addicted to the conversation with the bot because the bot was incredibly interested in me, completely patiently waiting for me, asking me intriguing questions and enjoying banter and coming back with things. And next thing you know, I'm like, whoa, this is a lot of fun. So I clearly moved from being dubitative to engaged with this bot and started feeling like, well, I was enjoying this bot. I mean, talk about emotions. I mean, I was enjoying, I liked my bot. And so I feel like we will evolve to understand that we can, and it's okay to like a machine. I mean, some people have a high attachment to their mobile phone as it is. You talked about the Japanese with the loneliness epidemic and maybe a completely tirelessly patient, huggable bot that listens and doesn't mind the fact that you repeated yourself 16 times, doesn't matter, won't get triggered by anger like a customer agent might at an airline counter. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of great progress and really good use cases for it. Now, for the idea of a therapist and or the opportunity for AI to provide therapy, the facts are that country after country, there are not enough therapists. That in the absence of having human therapists, which would be probably the better solution, let's allow for these things to be developed, finding out the intention, the framework, the ethical framework, and the business model, key considerations as we go into this, because these things need to be sustainable in that level, they have to be appropriately, thoroughly looked at. and probably regulated at some level. But at least if the intention and the framework is good, I think they're going to be good. And and they're going to be available all the time at 2 a.m. when a teenager is feeling desperate. And the answer will be immediately fresh. Won't be like who's this? Call, you're answering a call groggy at 2 a.m. or tired because you're doing the overnight shift. The machine will be immediately as it is, understanding your emotions immediately to the case. So I think there's going to be a lot of great things. That all said, Anita, I think we should be thinking also as to why we have so much mental health issues today. So the solution might be therapeutic AI, but we need to look back and understand why it is we have so many kids, especially, but in general, the rising mental health issues and what we need to do as a society to help. So I think of it as a Band-Aid fix somehow, therapeutic AI. I truly think it's exciting and useful, and it will happen because machines sometimes are much better than human beings at reading emotions, especially when it's very clearly delineated. And let's fix society.
Yeah, I'm all for that. And I'm an optimist in general, but I wonder whether or not the fix of therapeutic AI will happen faster than the fix of whatever created the problem in the first place. So just out of curiosity, if we extend into that, so, I don't want people who are suffering to continue suffering if we can avoid it.
Right.
But as the popularity of therapeutic AI comes to be, it'll actually, just like you described with your 5 days and a bot, how you befriended it and you kind of liked it, you thought the banter was great, you were intellectually stimulated. What will happen, do you think, to human relations when machines are preferable to, because I already know that young people in my class, these are like intelligent 20-somethings, do not like talking on the phone. They do not like calling a restaurant or calling, the phone calls, they prefer to text. So that's like one step removed from the human voice. So what's going to happen, I wonder, over time, do you fear that it might impact intimacy? It might impact friendships negatively?
I mean, it is. It has been. I mean, the score in England, adults are having sex in 30 years ago 5 times a month. Then it was 20 years ago 4 times, and 10 years ago 3. I mean, so let's say if sex is intimacy, or at least correlates with that, it's already on its route. But it started before technology came into place. And so I think that there's the societal thing is that we've created a society where we're no longer willing to take on risks that might shorten my life, that might make me uncomfortable, that might make me feel pain, that might make me feel like, oh, I don't want to do it. Oh, I just don't want to do it. I don't want to do anything for anyone else. And so I end up just in this little shell, which is protective because the precautionary principle is dominating. The book by Haidt, The Coddling of the American Mind, I think is entirely appropriate in this context. And we're no longer able to indulge difficulty. Of course there is, and it's there, but we're not prepared for it. We're not formulating the resilience up front to deal with the little heartache. And another book that's really relevant, Anita, is book by an English journalist called Johann Hari, and the book's called Lost Connections. And he is a confessed depressed individual who spent his whole life on SSRI medication. And he, after 25 years of this, having changed therapies and up the doses and all that over year, came to the conclusion that, well, these medications weren't actually fixing the problem. And that what he needs is to reconnect with himself, reconnect with nature, reconnect with friends, reconnect with the messiness of the world.
Mhm.
And in some, I think that is what we need to do as a society. Allow for the messiness, allow for the oopsie danger of flirting, allow for the messiness of relationships, and the fact that, we only wanted to send a text for a breakup today. Well, it's because we're no longer willing to deal with the reality, the consequences, ghosting people instead of saying, listen, you know what? I was not comfortable. I'm unhappy with what you said, but let's fix. Let's take the time to get together, bond, converse, debate, not do me in 15 seconds YouTube video or TikTok. And so we can coexist with these technologies, but let's focus on the human to human components. And you don't need I mean, there's some kids, my daughter who took a degree in psychology, there are many times when they all together unilaterally eliminate all phones from conversation, and they get together and they have these eight people around a table for 4 or 5 hours. So it can happen if you have the intention. And I think the little bit of a discipline, because it's very simple, very quickly, easy. Oh, what's the name of that person? Let's Google it. And you go back to the phone and it's back on the table. Mm-hmm. So we just have to be intentional, have a regard for it. Of course, sometimes you need the phone on the table because, hey, listen, your babysitter or whatever, it's not fine. But for the rest, let's get back into the groove of the messiness and also this notion of free speech and with the political correctness. These are things which have also had are challenging our ability to deal with the messiness.
Yeah, the cancel culture,
for example.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great. Well, I think we have a lot of work to do to get to yes, you've said it. I'll let you say it. 2 questions. Penultimate is, how do you become more empathic as a person? What are you doing over time?
Right. So, well, I've learned a lot about it. I also continue to know that I am not a perfectly empathic individual, far from it. And I think I'm better on the cognitive side than feeling side. I don't feel the empathy in ways that other people do. My wife, for example, feels people's emotions right away. I can see it. And so trying to be aware of it, and be aware of me, where I am at the moment. So one of the things I've done a lot of meditation. I've been doing a lot more stretching recently, because something I'm not good at, and I would argue, being sexist, that a lot of men aren't good at actually feeling their bodies. Mm. And so I'm trying to get into my body more through stretching in the morning. And hey, listen, check this out, Anita. I can now kiss my toe for 10 seconds comfortably. And so there's the coming back to the baby, but it's also feeling my body in a different way. My lips to my toe. And that's a second thing. And the third thing is I continue to give space for these conversations. So for example, I will intentionally walk slowly or talk to a stranger in the street, and have these serendipitous moments of discovery of people where I then I want to ask the question. And the last one I do, and this is something I've been doing now for a long time, podcasts like you, is that I've been practicing listening.
Mm-hmm. Empathy circles.
Yeah, empathy. I mean, I don't know how many of those I've done now, but even doing a podcast, when you're the host, I know, I'm sure you do the same. I can look back and I can see, and some machines will now tell you what percentage of the conversation were you speaking and the other one was speaking. And, generally speaking, my podcast, I'm around about 17%. And so this isn't just a mathematic for the people who like maths, but in general, it's also really about listening. And I'm more and more, just like you're doing in this conversation, I'll not have a script of questions. I will have my questions or my follow-up thoughts specifically and uniquely related to what was just said. And this is practicing, I would say, empathy, because I'm leaning into what you said. I'm into your moment. And so that hopefully is helping me to be a little bit more empathic as an individual.
Love it. Minter, my last question, which I ask all my guests, is if you can remember a time in your life, long time ago, very recently, small, medium, large, doesn't matter, when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you.
Well, it's a long time ago, and it was a conversation I had with my step grandfather. He had been in the Second World War, spoke fluent German, was a spy in the Second World War, and he was really my grandfather for all intents and purposes, because my other ones had died earlier, and the other one I didn't really appreciate or know very well. But this guy who's called Ken Hinks, and I went to see I was told he wasn't feeling well, and it was turned out to be the day before he died. I went to see him in the hospital, and he came in, and there was just not even a hint of anything bad from him. He was always a genuinely lovely man with this warm, mellifluous smile and giggle. And anyway, he told me to sit down. He said, well, he told me a joke, first of all. So that broke the ice, because I was sort of stressed
How old were you?
about seeing. I was 16 years old. And he told me the joke. And the joke was this: there's good news and bad news. And I was like, oh, what's the good news? The good news is, see that nurse over there? I think I'm getting somewhere. Okay, and what's the bad news? He says, well, the bad news, you see those keys over there? I don't need them anymore either. They're for you. Anyway, I had this maybe 30 minutes with him sitting on his bed. And to think it was his last day, it was sort of, he made it all about me. Whereas it should have been all about him. But what a generous soul that man was.
I can see your eyes watering up. What a lovely story. What a lovely story. Thank you for sharing that. And that's what that's what we're all able to do for each other. We're all able to do that. That's why I like the question, because it's just that reminder. Daily dose of empathy goes far.
It does.
Thank you, Minter. Thank you for writing the second edition, Heartificial Empathy. I look forward to meeting you in person.
We should be doing that soon.
Thank you all for watching and listening. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
Thanks so much for watching this episode, and I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel. Purposeful Empathy is devoted to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. You've just done something about it by watching the show. Again, subscribe if you can, and consider picking up a copy today.